directly. Was that a factor? And if it was, how did the police get them out? If you've got a mob, it's late at night, it's hot.
Yeah, it's very hot night.
How do they get them out?
That's a great, I do not know whether they were drinking. I wouldn't be surprised if they were drinking. I mean, it was Detroit. So there's a good chance, but I don't know that. Getting them out was the terrifying thing. Dr. Sweet begged the police not to take them out the front door. Because what he had seen, I'll give you one quick bit of background. Dr. Sweet grew up in a little town in Florida. Tiny little town in Florida called Bartow. Ordinary place. When he was a young man, he was a child, 5 times in that town, whites lynched black men. 5 times. Worst of those incidents, when Dr. Sweet, when Ocean Sweet, was 5 years old, the white people of Bartow burned a 16-year-old boy to death at the stake. So he knew what a mob could do. And all he could see was the police leading him out into that mob. So they sat in the house and he begged them, pull the drapes, don't take us out the front door. And the police, remarkably really, agreed to that. And so what they did is there's an alley out the back. And because it's a corner house, which probably made all the difference in the world because you didn't have to actually come down the alley, they pulled the paddy wagon into the alley, just the front of the alley, and loaded all 11 people into the back of that paddy wagon. And the mob surrounded it. And one policeman came out with his gun drawn and told him to get the hell out of the way. I think that's the only reason they got out of that neighborhood that night.
So all 11 are arrested. The prosecutor, a man named Toms, who, by the way, much later in his life was one of the judges at the Nuremberg trials.
Yeah.
Interesting man.
Yeah. Met his family too, actually, afterwards.
And then appears on the scene one of the great figures in American legal history, Clarence Darrow.
Yeah.
Explain how that happened.
That's what you call the technical term for this. Blind luck. What happened really was that 2 days after the Sweets were arrested, one of the New York City newspapers ran a tiny little article. It's a paragraph long, way in the back pages. The headline read, 11 Negroes arrested in Detroit. And I will guarantee you 99% of the readers of that newspaper that day didn't notice it. One guy in the entire city of New York read that newspaper article. And he's one of the towering figures of American civil rights history, and most people have never heard of him. His name is James Weldon Johnson. And he was the head of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And what he said when he read that article is he said, "We will defend the Sweets." And that's the first great stroke of luck. Now, they decided, the NAACP decided right off the bat, in those days, the NAACP did not have its own lawyers. Now it has one of the great legal teams and has for the last half century, because of the Sweet case, actually. Sweet case created the Legal Defense Fund for the NAACP. They didn't have that then. So they would hire lawyers to do their legal work for them, or better, get them to do it pro bono. That didn't work all that often. And so they set out to get a white lawyer. They wanted a white lawyer because they knew that the jury was going to be all white. And you didn't want the black lawyer arguing in a Detroit court for his black clients on their right to kill a white guy. They couldn't get one. 3 weeks to trial, they had no lawyer. No one wanted this case. Then that guy you mentioned said he'd do it. Clarence Darrow, arguably the greatest criminal defense lawyer of the 20th century, took on this case. Now, just a real quick background. Clarence Darrow, if you don't know his story completely, Clarence Darrow had made an entire career defending people other people really wouldn't want as neighbors. First great stage of his legal career, and he was at the end of his career by this point, was defending one of those, really one of the more popular groups in American society, radical labor leaders. So his first great client was a guy by the name of Eugene Victor Debs. Yeah, you've heard of him. 5-time candidate for the President of the United States on his Socialist Party ticket. Last time he ran was from a federal prison. He did. In prison for speaking out against a war. Can't imagine such a thing. One of his greatest clients was a fellow by the name of Big Bill Haywood. He was the president of a little organization called the Industrial Workers of the World, the most radical union in American history. He was accused of murdering the former governor of Idaho, He defended two labor leaders called they were the McNamara brothers, who had been accused of mass murder. They were accused of setting a bomb that went off at the Los Angeles Times building. Los Angeles Times was an infamous anti-union newspaper, and one day a bomb went off, killed a dozen people. And the McNamara brothers were accused of planting the bomb. Darrow represented them.
Did he kill?
That one actually went really badly. Turned out the McNamara brothers had blown up Los Angeles. 1924, Clarence Darrow defended two young men accused really of the most heinous crime you can imagine. Their names were Leopold and Loeb, and they had murdered a child to see if they could get away with it. 1925, in the summer, he defended another young man accused of another heinous crime. His name was John Scopes. He had committed the terrible crime of teaching the idea of evolution in a high school science class. So encouraging to think we've at least eliminated that as an issue anymore. Arguably, the Scopes monkey trial is the most famous trial in the 20th century. The Sweet trial was Clarence Darrow's next case. In November of 1925, he came into a Detroit courtroom with this fellow sitting on the bench by the name of Frank Murphy and defended the Sweets and their friends on a charge of first-degree murder.
As an aside, when Clarence Darrow was arguing the Leopold and Loeb case, the question was really not whether they were going to be convicted. Matter of fact, they were convicted rather quickly. The question was, would they be put to death? And Illinois had capital punishment.
Right.
Of course, that question is tried not to a jury, but to a judge.
Yep.
And this was a seasoned judge, a crotchety old guy. By the time that Darrow finished his closing argument, the judge was in tears.
Yep.
He was that good a lawyer. Judges don't cry very often. I guarantee you. He was that good a lawyer. So, Clarence Darrow, 3 weeks before trial, is presented with this case. What happens?
I don't think I'll tell you. Because I wrote this book. I got 2 kids. I got a sense of pride. Let me tell you, I'll tell you one thing. So, Clarence Darrow didn't know much law. He had gone to the University of Michigan Law School. I just want to explain to y'all, though Cooley, you probably don't care really. That's in my contract. I have to tell that one joke. That's how I got tenure at Ohio State.
Poor man.
Honestly, Clarence Darrow didn't believe in the law. Clarence Darrow said the law is a sham. What Clarence Darrow believed in was the power of words. And his greatest gift as a lawyer, and I think Leopold and Loeb is a great example of this, was his closing statements. Because then he had the stage to himself. And when you read his autobiography, which he published in the 30s, and you cannot believe a word of, he says that his closing statement to the Sweets was the best closing statement he ever made. So, if you don't mind, which is why I actually have the book here besides the cheap pitch, I would love to, if you don't mind, and you're really stuck, really, so you don't have much choice. I thought I would read you his closing statement. It's 7 hours long. One person is applauding. Yeah. 3 a.m., I want to be home. No, what I'll do is I will read you the closing of his closing. But it's the last 3. I don't believe in the law of hate. I may not be true to my ideals always, but I believe in the law of love. And I believe you can do nothing with hatred. I would like to see a time when man loves his fellow man and forgets his color or his creed. We will never be civilized until that time comes. I know the Negro race has a long road to go. I believe the life of a Negro has been a life full of tragedy, of injustice, of oppression. The law has made him equal, but man has not. I know there's a long road ahead of him before he can take the place which I believe he should take. I know that before him there is suffering, tribulation, and death among the blacks, and perhaps among the whites. I'm sorry. I would do what I can to avert it. I would advise patience. I would advise toleration. I would advise understanding. I would advise all those things which are necessary for men to live together. And that's all. And the reason I love that is, you know what you hear there? What you hear in that segment is Clarence Darrow standing in front of 12 white men in that jury box and promising redemption. That what he's holding out to them is the promise that America's greatest divide, that color line, can be bridged with understanding, with tolerance, with the transformation of the human heart. That's what made him a great lawyer.
So one has to ask, knowing only a little of the answer, did redemption come?
No.
I was afraid that would be the answer.
Let me explain what I mean. The Southern system of segregation, the system of segregation that was created at exactly the time that Ocean Sweet was a boy, that system that said you had to sit in the back of the bus, you had to have separate drinking fountains, that they have 2 doors colored in white, that's gone. You don't need me to tell you that. It's dead and gone. It's destroyed by that social movement that I started talking about this evening. But the Northern system of segregation, that system of segregation that divides American cities, black and white, separate and unequal, that system of segregation is almost completely in place. And of all the cities in America, Detroit, Ocean Sweet's Detroit, is among the most segregated. But on one point, and this is the last thing I'll say, on one point, Clarence Darrow had it exactly right. That until that system of segregation is dead and gone, until the Northern system of segregation is destroyed, we are not a civilized people.